Welcome, everybody, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. My name is Joe Arpezi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008, and after stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can find all of my content at letpurplerain.com. You can also follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. The best place I recommend that you follow is over on X. You can find me at UW_purple_rain. That is spelled REIGN. That is the best place to get up-to-date announcements about player news, finding out when I'm releasing items. I also love to share other content from great CFF analysts around the web, and it's really the best place that you can stay connected to exactly what's happening in college fantasy football. Now, we are in week 9. For a lot of you guys, that is the push to make the playoffs that start in week 12. But this year, I've been hosting the Battle for the Belt 52-Man League Challenge. And week 9 is the last week of the regular season. And right now, what we are looking at is, for those of you that may not remember here, this is a league that has 4 13-team divisions. And when the playoffs start in week 10, there will be 8 teams from each division that will move on to the divisional playoffs. The 4 divisional champions will then face head-to-head for the league championship. And right now, I'm doing an update. I'm going to be continuing to do updates for how that league is going. But just going to do a quick recap here of where the standings are heading into this last week. And just kind of reviewing the bottom of the standings to see who's still in the fight here to be able to make the playoffs. And we're going to start off by looking at the Eric Froton division. Right now, unfortunately, our friend Eric Froton is not in the mix for the playoffs. And looking here toward the bottom, what I'm seeing is we've got about 4 teams that are all kind of in the mix at the bottom, starting with Brad Everett there, Mark Holman, Garrett Jan Vanderberg, and Justin Jaworski. All these guys are kind of going to be in the mix. I think any of them could make it here with that last spot. So this division is going to be highly up for grabs. The next division, the Jared Palmgren division. Jared Palmgren is doing very well at second place and just behind Syracuse Sharks. And looking here at the bottom of this league, I would say we got about 4 teams that are battling here for the last spots, with Brian Kruper, Rebel Nut, an old friend of mine who I've been playing fantasy football with for at least 15, 18 years, Dwight Peebles, and Caddy J 1970. All these guys are in a pretty close bunch here. But, Caddy J is going to have a big week and need some help with couple of these guys having down weeks to jump into that top 8. In the Joe Arpezi division, I'm hanging in there in second place behind Goat Ropers, who has a pretty strong lead in first. And looking here at this division, I would say probably going to come down to 3 people. Caleb Godspeed, Mark from CFB Depth, and Brian Delana. All of those guys look like they're in the mix. Brian's going to need a little help to jump into that top 8. Godspeed probably can make it there unless he just has a really down week, but that's looking like the group that's fighting for the last playoff spots. And in our final division, the John McKechnie division. John McKechnie is leading his division right now, and when we look here toward the bottom to see who's going to make it, I see another 3-man race here with this division. Ryan Ralph, Bacon Fueled from Fantasy Points team, and Ryan Carpenter from any of you guys that are on X, Carp G, was it 926, I think, Carp G 926. All these guys are going to be battling pretty well here to try and get that last playoff spot. Ryan's got a pretty nice little 20-point lead over Ryan Carpenter, but he's going to have to stay on top of his game and not have a down week. And then it looks like a pretty good fist fight that might happen between Bacon Field and Carp here for that last spot. And talking about today's show, we're going to be covering my start sit selections here on YouTube and Spotify. And then exclusively on letpurplerain.com, I will be answering your submitted questions along with giving some additional bonus picks on players. When you go to letpurplerain.com and you go into the article, there are 2 videos there. The first one is going to be showing the main show, and then the submitted question show. You just scroll down a little bit further. That's where you'll be able to find that one. And jumping in here, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. And for those of you that might be new, come across the show, what I like to do is I'll go over 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 3 receivers, and 3 tight ends that I find interesting for the week. I will review where I have them ranked in my weekly rankings. I will also go over a handful of advanced stats. I will go over what Vegas is predicting for their team to score. And then my advanced stats, what I do is I'll let you know whether or not these are really good for the matchup, kind of good, average, kind of bad, really bad. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'd use a color coding on that. Dark green is really good, light green is kind of good, black is average, light red is kind of bad, dark red is really bad. Now that I've kind of covered the way that I go through the show here, I'm going to start with Miller Moss, the quarterback from Louisville. He is taking on Boston College. I have him ranked my number 11 quarterback, the highest I've had him all year. And one big reason for that is Vegas is expecting Louisville to score 40 and a half points. And right now, Louisville's running game has kind of gone missing in action. It's been Miller Moss in the passing game. They're really getting it done. And that's one of the things I really like about Moss this week. The fantasy matchup grade, and I did leave that out. Sorry, when I'm describing some of the stuff that I do here on the show. What I do for coming up with a fantasy matchup grade is I will pull the offensive and defensive team stats. I will then assign fantasy points to those team stats, and I re-rank the rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense based on the fantasy point totals. Then I take where these offenses and defenses rank, compare them to one another, and then I use that system, an automated system that looks at that difference, and then it assigns a fantasy matchup grade to that. So here, for Miller Moss, he has an A fantasy matchup grade. You can't ask for much better than that. And that's obviously really good for him. Everything else is pretty good when it comes to the other advanced stats. We have Boston College is giving up 2.29 passing touchdowns per game. They're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 72.4% of the time, and they are giving up 7.7 yards per pass attempt. These are all great signs for Miller Moss this week. So I'm going to say Miller Moss, Louisville, start him. Next guy I'm going to go over to here is Rocco Beck from Iowa State. He is taking on BYU. I have him all the way down as my quarterback 56 for the week. Vegas is looking for an okay day from Iowa State, but not great, projecting Iowa State to score 26 points. I'd put that in that average range. And the other thing that's kind of average here for Rocco is, his fantasy matchup comes out to just a C-, right on the edge of being kind of bad in the D+ range. And I can see why this works out. But the other advanced stats I'm looking at with this matchup are the first 2 are kind of bad, which is that BYU is only giving up 0.86 passing touchdowns per game, and they're only giving up touchdowns in the red zone 42.9% of the time. A really bad matchup stat here is that BYU is only giving up 5.7 yards per pass attempt. All of these things are not good signs for Rocco here, so I'm going to have to say Rocco Beck, Iowa State, sit him. My next guy here, I am just going to say part of this is a gut feeling on my end, but I'm talking about Devin Dampier, Utah, going up against Colorado. Vegas is calling on Utah to score 32.5 points. I really like anything where I start to see 30 points and above. The high 30s and 40s is really good, so I'd put this in a pretty good range. 2 other things that are pretty good for Dampier here. His fantasy matchup grade is a B-, and Colorado is giving up 7.5 yards per pass attempt. I don't have it on the screen, but the rushing matchup as well for Dampier, since he is a running quarterback, is also somewhere in that B range. So on both sides of the ball for Dampier, whether it's running or throwing, he has advanced stats that are either kind of good or in the average range. Looking at the passing stuff again, two average matchup stats here is that Colorado gives up about 1.3 passing touchdowns per game, and they give up touchdowns in the red zone 57.7% of the time. Dampier didn't have his best game last week against BYU, but something tells me this team's going to come out fired up, and I have a feeling that the Colorado defense is going to play worse than we've seen this year. So that's one reason why I had Dampier all the way up to my quarterback number 9. I just have this gut feeling Dampier's going to have a pretty good day here. So I'm going to say Devin Dampier, Utah, start him. Take a sip of my water here before we jump into the running backs. I'm going to start things off with the guy I had pegged in the summer to be the RB1 this year, and unfortunately he's really not lived up to it. That's Bryson Washington from Baylor. He is taking on Cincinnati, with Vegas calling on Baylor to score 31 points in this matchup. I have Washington all the way down at my running back 62. He's been below average for his production lately, and looking at the fact that he hasn't really had a big breakout game in a while, and looking at this matchup with Cincinnati, I don't feel great here. The fantasy matchup is only a C-, and this is a game where I think both teams should be scoring, should be able to move the ball well in the air. So you would think having a balanced attack where Washington can help keep Cincinnati off the field should be a game plan approach, but just Washington hasn't been great at doing that lately. So I do think that the C- fantasy matchup grade is a pretty accurate one for what I could expect in this game. And two kind of bad advanced stats here is that Cincinnati's only giving up 0.86 rushing touchdowns per game, and they're only giving up touchdowns in the red zone 47.8% of the time. The one thing that does work in Washington's favor as being kind of good here is that Cincinnati is giving up 3.89 yards per carry. So that's one thing that kind of works for them, but when you combine the fact that there's a lot of average and kind of bad advanced stats in this game, and the fact he really hasn't given us, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I mean, he hasn't been regularly popping off 15 fantasy points. I mean, I'd prefer to see 20 from a running back, but we haven't been consistently getting 15 points out of him lately. I'm going to have to say Bryson Washington, Baylor, sit him. One guy who started the year good, hit a cold streak, and he's coming back pretty well right now is Kentrell Bullock from South Alabama. He has Georgia State this week. I have him as my number 12 running back for the week, and Vegas is calling on South Alabama to score 31 points. Every single advanced stat here for this matchup is really good for Bullock. He has an A fantasy matchup grade. Georgia State is giving up 3.29 rushing touchdowns per game. They are giving up touchdowns in the red zone 80% of the time. And they are giving up 5.1 yards per carry. This is a no-brainer, guys. If you have Kentrell Bullock in your lineup, you have to start him this week. The next guy I have, these are the rushing numbers. I know we're talking about running backs here, but I have Eli Heinenreich from Navy. He is a guy who does a lot of damage in the air as a receiver, typically a low volume. He gets big plays over the top in play action. I focused on the rushing stats here because I think he's also going to be successful on the ground this week. But he's taking on FAU, Florida Atlantic, and Vegas is calling on Navy to score nearly 39 points. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Heidenreich can get 2 touchdowns, but I think he's got to be a lock for at least 1 in the air. But I think he has a potential to get 2. So that's one reason why I have him extremely high. I have him as my running back 5 this week, and this is a little bit of a gut feeling by me, but the advanced stats back it up. 3 things that are all really good stats here for Heidenreich is that he has an A-plus fantasy matchup grade for, once again, these are the rushing stats, an A-plus fantasy matchup grade. FAU is giving up 2.43 rushing touchdowns per game. So we're hoping maybe he can get like a rushing touchdown in there as well. and they're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 72% of the time. And then another stat, which is kind of good, is that Florida Atlantic is giving up 4.55 yards per carry. Like I said, this is kind of a gut play why I have him so high in my rankings. Something tells me I think he could definitely get some big yardage in the air, but on the ground, I think he might have an opportunity to put up more rushing yards and maybe a rushing touchdown as well this week. So Eli Heidenreich, Navy, I'm going to say start him. I'm going to take a sip of water before we get into the wide receivers here. I'm going to start things off not with the top guy at Miami, but the next best guy, CJ Daniels. He is taking on Syracuse, and Vegas is calling on Miami to score 39 points this week. I've got Daniels as my wide receiver 11. He's been fairly good over the last 3 to 4 weeks. Last week was kind of average, or a little below average, but I think the matchup had a lot to do with that. This matchup with Syracuse is nice. It gets an A grade for fantasy matchup. And two other advanced stats, which are pretty good here, is that Stanford is giving up 1.86 passing touchdowns per game, and they are giving up 8 yards per pass attempt. The one thing that's a little worrisome is that Stanford's only giving up touchdowns in the red zone 38.2% of the time. I do think that really bad advanced stat is because people are breaking big plays for touchdowns. So, I want to take that back. I don't think that would affect that because if you're breaking a big play, they don't get into the red zone to then count toward that statistic. So, if they get down there, that's going to be one difficult thing for Daniels. So you're going to be hoping that he hits more big plays. But I really do like Daniels this week. So I'm going to say CJ Daniels, Miami, start him. The next guy here has been surprisingly consistent from a fantasy standpoint on a surprisingly 5-2 Big Ten team, and that is Griffin Wild from Northwestern. I almost said North Carolina there. From Northwestern, and they are taking on Nebraska this week. Vegas is only calling on Northwestern to score 19 points. That's not very good here. Another advanced stat, which is not very good, is that this fantasy matchup grade is a D+. Nebraska has one of the best fantasy pass defenses in the country. I think they're in the top 3. That also explains why these two really bad stats are here. Nebraska is only giving up 0.43 passing touchdowns per game, and they are only giving up 4.9 yards per pass attempt. The one positive thing for Wild is that Nebraska is giving up touchdowns in the red zone 71.4% of the time, but most of those are coming on the ground. So, Griffin Wild here, while he has been good, I have him ranked as my wide receiver number 60, and with these advanced stats, that makes him, Griffin Wild from Northwestern, a hard sit-em. Next guy is someone that I loved early in the year. He was just on fire, one of the best wide receivers, and he's really cooled off over the last handful of games, and that is Mario Craver, Texas A&M. He is taking on a tough LSU defense. Vegas is calling on Texas A&M to score 25.5 points. That would be in the average range. The other thing which is average is his fantasy matchup grade, which is a C+. Two kind of bad advanced stats here. LSU only gives up 0.7 passing touchdowns per game, and they only give up 6 yards per pass attempt. The one positive, once again, all of these guys have these two negative ones. They have one positive thing going for them, and that is the touchdowns converted in the red zone, which is happening with LSU 64.3% of the time. I'm not a big fan of how Craver's been playing. This is a tough matchup, and I'm going to apologize to any Texas A&M fans out there. Like you guys will do good. You start building up hope, and like right now you're fighting for, trying to win the SEC, and then a game happens where just everything comes apart and unravels, and my gut is just telling me that LSU offense, it's like I don't know why, but something tells me, could this be a game where just Texas A&M blows it and LSU, I'm not going to say their offense explodes, but maybe they just win a really ugly 17-14 game. So if you're an A&M fan, something tells me this might be a trap game. Look out. But I'm going to say Mario Craver, Texas A&M, sit 'em. Take another sip of water here before we jump into the tight ends. I'm going to be a little more positive here with the tight ends. I had a lot of negativity there with wide receivers, but I'm going to start off with Justin Jolie from NC State. He is taking on Pitt, and in this matchup here, Vegas is calling on NC State to score 25 points. When I looked at both the rushing and passing matchups for NC State, the rushing matchup is average to kind of bad, but the passing matchup is kind of good here. And I can see NC State leaning more into the passing game than we've seen them doing lately. Because of that and these advanced stats, I bumped Jolie up to my tight end 11 this week. The fantasy matchup grade is a B+, which is pretty good, right on the edge of being really good. And one thing that is really good in this matchup is that Pitt is giving up red zone touchdowns 70% of the time. The other two advanced stats are just average here. Pitt giving up 1.7 passing touchdowns per game and giving up 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Like I said, I like the NC State offense taking a shift, leaning on the passing game more this week. So I'm going to say Justin Jolie, NC State, start him. My next guy here is RJ Maryland from SMU. He is taking on Wake Forest, and Vegas is calling on SMU to score 28.5 points in this one. I have Maryland as my tight end 28 this week. I'm a bit down on him for a couple of reasons. One, SMU has had some games where they've had really good passing matchups, and he really hasn't gotten a big chunk of the production. That scares me off of him a bit. The fantasy matchup grade in this one is a B, which is kind of good, but all the other advanced stats don't really line up that way. Two kind of bad stats are that Wake Forest only gives up one passing touchdown per game, and they only give up 47.8, they give up touchdowns in the red zone 47.8% of the time. A really bad advanced stat is that Wake Forest only gives up 4.9 yards per pass attempt. My gut just tells me with Maryland not being utilized as much as I think he could be, and these bad matchup stats, I'm going to say RJ Maryland, SMU, sit 'em. And then one guy who's been cold lately, but I think he's about to have a bounce back game here, is Brett Norfleet, Missouri, taking on Vanderbilt in a big game this week. I have Norfleet as my tight end 15. This isn't going to be a big high-scoring game. Missouri's only being called on to score 25 points. But because of the tough nature of it, I've said anytime you have these tough matchups, tight ends tend to get leaned on a little more. But there's actually good numbers in this tough-fought game that we're about to have that I think work for Norfleet. This is a B+ fantasy matchup grade. The Vanderbilt defense is giving up 1.86 passing touchdowns per game, and they're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 60% of the time. Those are all pretty good advanced stats. An average advanced stat is that Vanderbilt is giving up 6.9 yards per pass attempt. I think that this is going to be a game that, Missouri's not just going to be able to run the ball all over them. They're going to have to mix in some play action pass. I think Norfleet's going to get involved in the offense again like we saw him a bit earlier in the year. So I'm going to say Brett Norfleet, Missouri, start him. Well, guys, I want to thank you here. This was my selections for this week's Stardom Sit-'em podcast episode. Each week I post a thread on X and Substack asking you to submit your questions. If you want help with your lineups, please join in that discussion. Submit your questions to me. I say in the instructions, only give me one question, but we've been a little light on questions lately, so I have no problem if you want to shoot 2 questions to me. Let me know which one's the more important one. So if I can't include all of them, I can at least get the most important one for you. And if you want to watch my answers to those, jump over to letpurplerain.com where you can see those answers. I have a link in the description below so you can find that. You've been listening to Stardom Sit-'em. Please follow on YouTube and Spotify. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.